She set it against his mouth. Not before. Against. Lisa didn't ask. She didn't explain. She grabbed the lapels of the most expensive suit in the room, pressed her lips to a stranger's, and kissed him like his name was already written somewhere in her chest. Her hands weren't shaking. And that was the terrifying part. Because Lisa was a woman who had held a dying man's hand at 3 a.m. without flinching. She did not rattle easy, but tonight she was running. From the corner of her eye, she watched the two men in the lobby go completely still. Watched them look at each other, watched them hesitate. Good. She held the kiss a second longer, calculated, deliberate, then slowly pulled back. She expected irritation, a shove maybe, a stranger's offense. Instead, she got silence. The man hadn't moved, not 1 inch. His dark eyes dropped to her face slowly, the way a man looks at something he is deciding whether to keep. One gloved hand had found her waist at some point during the kiss. She hadn't noticed when. That should have been her first warning. Then he spoke. His voice was low, smooth, the kind of quiet that didn't need volume because every room already knew to listen. "They're watching," he said. Not to her, but to the men across the lobby. "Walk away." And they did. 2 armed men, gone. Like smoke. Lisa exhaled, her first real breath in 20 minutes. She almost smiled. She almost let herself believe the smartest move she had made all night just worked. Then she felt his hand, still on her waist, still not letting go. She looked up at him and something cold moved through her chest, because he wasn't looking at the men who had just fled. He was looking at her, like she was the most interesting problem he had encountered in years, like she had just walked into a game she didn't know existed and made the first move without knowing the rules. 2 hours, Lizzie said quietly. A confirmation, an agreement, a sentence that by the time it was over would change everything she thought she knew about herself. Lisa didn't know his name yet. She didn't know about the tattoo on his neck or what it meant, or that she had seen it before on a dead man's file in her hospital 6 months ago. She didn't know that the men she had just escaped were nothing compared to what she had just run toward. And she had absolutely no idea that a woman across that same lobby watching and waiting with a champagne flute in one hand had just put Lisa's name on a list it was very hard to come off of. All Lisa knew standing there in the chandelier light of the Onyx Resort was that she had kissed a stranger to survive the next 2 hours. What she didn't know was that she had just handed the most dangerous man in Las Vegas a reason to stay interested. And Monsieur was very good at staying interested. That 3 hours earlier, Lisa was just a nurse trying to do the right thing. And that, as it turned out, was the most dangerous thing she could have been. She found the prescription records at 7:43 in the evening, 40 minutes before her shift ended. A patient file she hadn't opened in 6 months flagged by pharmacy for irregularities. Her name, her credentials, her license number signed against a list of controlled substances she had never prescribed, never touched, never seen. 53 forged scripts, all traced back to her. Lisa sat in the supply closet for 4 minutes, she counted, before her hands stopped shaking long enough to think. Gerald, her ex-fiancé, the man she had trusted with her passwords, her apartment key, her future. He hadn't just broken her heart when he left. He had been building a trap underneath her while she slept. She couldn't go to her supervisor. She couldn't call the police, not without evidence that she hadn't done this herself. What she needed was the one man who had witnessed Gerald brokering those deals. A hospital board member named Rains, a man she had seen in a photo on Gerald's phone 6 months ago. A photo Gerald had no idea she had seen. Rains would be at the Onyx Resort Gala tonight, a charity event, public, safe, or so she thought. She changed out of her scrubs in the hospital bathroom into the burgundy wrap dress she kept in her locker for emergency situations. Because Lisa Washington was a woman who planned for emergencies, even the ones she never expected to live through. She pressed her natural curls into place, smoothed her edges with the precision of a woman who knew that how you entered a room could determine whether you left it. She did not look like a woman who was terrified. She had learned long ago that looking terrified only invited more of the thing you feared. She found Rains in 40 minutes. It took her another 20 to get close enough to show him what she had. He went pale. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He talked, fast, too fast, words spilling out of him like a man who had been waiting for someone to ask the right question for a very long time. He told her Gerald hadn't acted alone. He told her the prescription scheme was a small piece of something much larger, a network that moved money through hospital systems across 3 states, and that the man running it wasn't Gerald. Gerald was an instrument. The man running it had a name, Rains whispered so quietly she had to lean in to catch it, a Korean name she didn't recognize, a name that meant nothing to her yet, but would mean everything before the night was over. And then Rains looked past her shoulder and his face changed completely. The 2 men appeared at the edge of the ballroom like they had materialized from the walls, dark suits, earpieces, eyes that moved the way predators' eyes moved, scanning, tracking, locking. They weren't looking at Rains, they were looking at her. Lisa understood then with the particular clarity that only comes when survival instinct overrides everything else that Gerald hadn't just used her credentials. He had sold her out completely. Her name, her location, her face, traded to settle a debt she didn't even know existed. She moved before she decided to move. That was the training in her. Triage first, panic later. She crossed the lobby and measured strides, calculating exits, calculating angles, calculating which direction had the most people, the most witnesses, the most possibility. And then she ran out of room. The lobby narrowed, the men closed in. And there, standing at the concierge desk, back half turned, speaking to no one, still as a man who had never once in his life needed to look over his shoulder, was Monsieur. She didn't know his name yet. She only knew the suit, the posture, the particular stillness of a man that a room arranges itself around without being asked. She grabbed his lapels, pressed her mouth to his, and whispered it against his lips like a password. Please be my boyfriend for 2 hours. His name, she learned, was Monsieur, not from him. He didn't offer it. She caught it from the way a hotel manager appeared at his elbow within 60 seconds of them sitting down at the private high-limit lounge, the way the man bent slightly at the waist and said it in a near whisper, the way everyone within earshot found a reason to look somewhere else. Monsieur. One word. No explanation attached, the kind of name that didn't need one. He sat across from her at a table that seemed to exist in its own atmosphere. Amber light. The low pulse of jazz from somewhere below, the smell of sandalwood and something darker underneath like old wood and cold iron. His jacket was off now, folded with unnerving neatness over the arm of his chair. He wore a black shirt, the collar open just enough to reveal the edge of a tattoo at his neck. Lisa's eyes moved there before she could stop them. Geometric, precise, a pattern of interlocking lines that shouldn't have meant anything to her. She pulled her eyes back to her glass, filed it away. She had learned in 7 years of nursing that the details you couldn't explain immediately were the ones worth remembering. You're calculating, Monsieur said. He hadn't looked up from the cards a dealer had set in front of him, a game that appeared to be for show since no one else was playing. You do it with your jaw. It tightens. Lisa said nothing. Don't be embarrassed, he continued. It's a good quality. Most people panic. You problem solve. He finally looked up. His eyes were dark, not warm, but not cold either. Precise, like a man who had trained himself to see without reacting. I respect that. You don't know me, Lisa said, steady. She would be damned before she let her voice betray her. No, he agreed. But I'd like to. She almost laughed. Almost. 2 hours is not a biography exchange. 2 hours is enough time to learn everything important about a person. He set the cards down. Then he said something that stopped her cold. You check the exits in the order trauma nurses check them, fast, methodical, left to right. You made eye contact with the man you went to speak to before the altercation, and you held a document in your left hand that you destroyed in the powder room on your way to the lobby. He tilted his head slightly. Also, your name tag impression is still on your wrist. You removed it quickly but not carefully. The silence between them stretched like a wire pulled taut. Who are you? She asked, and this time she meant it down to the bone. Monsieur smiled. It didn't reach his eyes, but it was real somehow. The smile of a man surprised by his own interest. Tonight, he said, I'm your boyfriend. Then his phone lit up on the table between them. He glanced at it. The smile disappeared. Whatever was on that screen turned the atmosphere at that table from charged to dangerous in the space of a breath. He turned the phone face down. Stay here, he said, standing. His voice was pleasant, unhurried, but his eyes told a different story. Don't move. Don't speak to anyone. And if a woman in a white dress approaches this table, he paused, adjusting his cufflink with the focused calm of someone who had learned to finish every sentence no matter what was burning around them. Walk away from her, immediately. He left before she could ask why. Lisa looked around the room, found the woman in the white dress in under 10 seconds, standing near the bar, champagne flute in hand, watching Lisa with a smile that had no warmth behind it, the kind of smile that knew something you didn't. And Lisa realized, sitting alone at a Mafia boss's table in the middle of Las Vegas, that the 2 hours she had bargained for had just become the least of her calculations. Else was out of her control. Heartbeats else was out of her control. Heartbeats, minutes, the number of exits in a room, the number of breaths between one crisis and the next. Monsieur returned to the table and sat down. He poured himself 2 fingers of something amber without offering her any. Not rudeness. She sensed it was something else. A tell. The first crack in his composure she had seen all night. The woman in the white dress, Lisa said before he could redirect. Who is she? He looked at her with something that might have been appreciation. You didn't move. You told me not to. Most people don't listen. I'm not most people. He studied her for a moment. Her name is Han Seo, he said. She works for a rival organization. She was at this event tonight for a specific purpose, and your presence disrupted it. How did my presence disrupt anything? I kissed you for 30 seconds. 42, Monsieur said without missing a beat, and because of those 42 seconds, she missed her window. A pause. She's angry about that. Lisa processed this slowly. What was her window? Silence. Monsieur. Something shifted in his expression, subtle, like weather changing behind glass. She realized it was the first time she had said his name. She hadn't intended it to land the way it did, but it did, and he felt it, and somehow that made the table feel much smaller. She was going to kill me, he said finally, using a signal, a specific kind of signal. He looked at her steadily. You used it first. The realization moved through her like cold water. She had grabbed a man in a crowded lobby and kissed him to survive, and in doing so, she had accidentally intercepted a hit. She hadn't saved herself from danger. For the duration of tonight is for the duration of tonight is functionally the same thing. That's not what I signed up for. No. He turned the glass slowly between his fingers. But it's where you are. Lisa pushed back from the table. She crossed to the window, floor to ceiling, the Las Vegas Strip bleeding neon into the black sky below, and pressed one hand against the glass. She needed to think without his eyes on her, without the weight of whatever this was pressing against her chest. She heard him move, not toward her, just a shift in his chair, the way a man moves when he has decided something. You're a nurse, he said behind her. Quiet, almost gentle, and somehow that was more unnerving than everything else. 7 years. 6, she said, then corrected herself. 7. He let the slip pass without comment. Was watching her from across the room, and was watching her from across the room, and in the low amber light, he looked like something carved rather than born. All sharp edges and deliberate stillness, except for his hands. His right hand rested on the table with a slight tremor he was working to control. She noticed it the way she noticed everything medical, before she decided to. She didn't say anything about it, neither did he. But something passed between them in that silence, the acknowledgement of a thing seen but not yet named, and it shifted the atmosphere in the room in a way that neither of them could take back. The 2 hours, she said carefully, were an audition. Consider it a very well-timed coincidence, he said. That is not what that is. No, he agreed, it's not. Something heavy settled in Lisa's chest. Not fear. She had moved past fear somewhere between the lobby and this conversation. This was something sharper. The particular weight of realizing that you thought you were making a move and you were actually being moved. She didn't ask him the next question yet. She wasn't ready for the answer, and she knew instinctively that with a man like Monsieur, you did not ask questions you weren't prepared to survive. She turned back to the window instead. Let the city burn below her. And told herself she still had a choice. She almost believed it. What she didn't know was that upstairs in his suite, a locket sat open on a desk, and inside it was a face she had been looking at her whole life, not knowing, not yet. She didn't sleep. She sat in the suite Missu's staff had shown her to, a room of muted grays and cool marble that smelled like money and secrets, and turned the night over in her mind the way she turned difficult diagnoses, eliminating the impossible, examining what remained. Fact. Gerald had forged her credentials. Fact. Someone had sent men to find her tonight. Fact. Missu had known something about her before she kissed him, and Rains had whispered a name before the men appeared, a Korean name connected to the network Gerald served. She turned that name over in her mind now, examining it from every angle, understanding that it was a door she had not yet opened but would have to. She moved quietly through the suite. Years of night shifts had made her silence instinctive. She told herself she was looking for a phone charger. She told herself that right up until she saw the open folder on the desk in the adjoining study, Korean text, a photograph, a name she couldn't read, and beneath it a locket, simple, gold, the kind of thing that had no business in a room belonging to a man like Missu. She picked it up, pressed the small clasp. Inside was a photograph, old, at edges soft, colors faded to that particular warmth that only decades could produce. A woman standing on a street in Seoul, laughing at something off camera, young, beautiful in a way that stopped time. Wearing a dress in a shade of green Lisa recognized because she had seen it in a different photograph her entire life. The photograph that sat on her mother's bookshelf in Atlanta. Her mother, 23 years old. Seoul, 1994. Lisa's hands went cold. "That belonged to my brother," Missu said. When she spun, he was standing in the doorway, jacket gone, watching her with an expression she couldn't name. Grief and restraint braided so tightly they had become something else entirely. She should have put the locket down. She should have apologized, deflected, retreated. Instead, she said, "Where did he get this photograph?" Something moved across his face. "Where did you get that question?" "The woman in this picture," Lisa said, and her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "Is my mother." The room went completely still. Missu crossed the space between them in 4 steps. He took the locket from her hands, not roughly, but with a care that told her this was the one thing in his possession he actually valued, and looked at the photograph for a long moment. When he looked up, there was something different in his eyes, not the controlled danger she'd catalogued all evening, something rawer. The look of a man confronting a truth he hadn't expected to arrive like this. "My brother died in a Las Vegas hospital," he said carefully. 7 months ago. Unidentified. They never found who was responsible." "John Doe," Lisa said quietly. "He came into my ER." Missu's jaw tightened. "He gave me something before he died," she continued. Her heart was hammering, but she kept her voice level. "A photograph, the same one you're holding." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, Las Vegas kept burning, indifferent, glittering, relentless. In here, 2 people stood at the edge of something enormous, something that had begun before either of them was old enough to understand what fate felt like. "He knew," Missu said, more to himself than to her. "He knew, and he sent me to you. He didn't send you anywhere. I kissed you in a lobby, did you?" He looked at her with something she couldn't fully read. "Or did someone make sure you would be in that lobby, made sure I would be standing exactly where you would reach?" The cold moved through her chest again. Different this time. Not fear. Recognition. "Gerald," she said slowly. And then the name Rains had whispered surfaced through everything else, and she understood now what door she had been built to open. The man Gerald served. The man running the network through hospital systems across 3 states. The man who had been inside Missu's organization for 30 years, protecting a secret that had started with a journalist in Seoul in 1994. "Your ex-fiancé was not working for loan sharks, Lisa," Missu said. "He was working for the people who killed my brother, and they used him to use you, to get close to me in a way no weapon could." She stared at him. "They turned you into a key," he said, "without telling you what door you were meant to open." Lisa's mind moved fast. Connecting, calculating. Gerald. The forged prescriptions, Rains and the name he had whispered, the gala, the men who followed her. Han Seo in her white dress watching from across the room. None of it had been coincidence. All of it had been architecture, and she had walked through every door they built for her thinking she was running away. "What door?" she asked. "What was I supposed to open?" Monsieur looked at her for a long moment. The controlled stillness was back, but underneath it now she could see the shape of something human, something that had been waiting a long time to be found. "My brother's name was Junho," he said. "He spent the last 2 years of his life trying to prove that our father did not order the killing of a sole journalist in 1994. A woman named Park Soo-yeon, who had been investigating our family's financial connections to a government official. Junho believed the real order came from inside our own organization, someone who wanted our father removed. He followed the evidence for 2 years, and it led him here to Las Vegas. He got close to something. And then someone shot him and left him 3 blocks from your hospital." "Park Soo-yeon," Lisa said. "She survived," Monsieur said. "Changed her name, disappeared. Junho spent months trying to find her before he died. He never did." He looked at her and waited. "My mother's name," Lisa said, and her voice was very quiet, before she came to America, was Park Soo-yeon. The room held its breath. She watched it move through him. The confirmation of something he had suspected, but not yet allowed himself to fully believe. His jaw tightened and then released, and the grief in his eyes was real, not performed, the grief of a man whose brother had died chasing a thread that was standing in front of him right now in a burgundy dress. "He trusted you with the one thing that could end this," Monsieur said. "Your mother is the only living witness to what actually happened in Seoul. The only person who can prove our father was framed. And the man who gave the original order has been sitting inside our organization for 30 years, waiting for the bloodline to run out. The same man Rain's named tonight before the men came for you." "Han Seo works for him," Lisa said. "Han Seo is his instrument," Monsieur said. "She has been feeding him information and protecting his position for years. And KP-eun." He stopped. Lisa waited. "KP-eun has been reporting to him as well," Monsieur said. "For how long and how much I don't yet know." There it was, not resolved, not clean, just the truth sitting between them like a lit fuse with an unknown length. He didn't say more that night. He didn't need to. He simply took the locket back to his desk, closed the folder, and looked at her across the dim room with an expression that was neither an invitation nor a dismissal. Just a door left slightly open. Lisa stood there and understood that the trap she had walked into was built so carefully she had mistaken it for a choice. For the worst part was she still didn't know who had built it, Gerald, Monsieur, or something much older than either of them. And somewhere in the hotel below them, Han Seo set down her champagne flute, picked up her phone, and dialed a number. "She knows," Han Seo said when the line connected. And he told her. A pause on the other end, then moved to the second plan. Han Seo smiled. Slow, patient, the smile of someone who had always known the board would eventually reset. Good. Level and her jaw set, the burgundy dress level and her jaw set, the burgundy dress still on her body, her mind already 3 steps ahead. She had a shift in 4 hours. She had a life that existed outside of whatever last night had been. She had a sister who didn't know any of this was happening, and she intended to keep it that way. She told herself all of this in the elevator, in the lobby. Of antiseptic and recycled air. The sound of antiseptic and recycled air, the sound of monitors, the particular rhythm of a place that never stopped moving. She changed into her scrubs, splashed water on her face, looked at herself in the mirror, and made the same decision she made every morning. Hold it together, you can fall apart later. She made it 40 minutes into her shift before her charge nurse found her. "Lisa," Sandra's voice was careful in a way it had never been before. "There's a board meeting. They're asking for you. I'm on shift." "Lisa," Sandra touched her arm. "They're not asking." The boardroom was on the 4th floor, a glass-walled room Lisa had entered exactly twice in 7 years, both times for commendations. She walked in now to find 8 board members seated around a table, and at the head of it, the hospital's legal counsel. Documents spread across the surface like a map of something she hadn't been invited to navigate. "Ms. Washington," the counsel said, "as of 6 this morning, Onyx Holdings LLC has completed its acquisition of this facility. Full asset transfer pending regulatory approval. The room was very quiet. The new ownership has expressed specific interest in retaining staff who demonstrate discretion and adaptability. He slid a single page across the table toward her. This is a personal contract. Direct terms separate from your existing employment agreement. She looked at the paper. Her name was already on it, and at the bottom in a signature she would have recognized anywhere after last night, measured, deliberate, the handwriting of a man who chose every word before he committed it. It was Monsieur's. She didn't touch the document. He bought the hospital, she said, and the words tasted exactly like what they were. A move she had not seen coming because she had been looking at the wrong board entirely. The new ownership has also pledged to expand the free clinic by 2 wings and clear all outstanding patient debt accrued in the last fiscal year. These commitments are contingent on key staff retention. There it was. Not a threat. Monsieur was too precise for threats. A structure. Like families a month who had nowhere else to go. Families a month who had nowhere else to go. He had not built a cage out of bars. He had built it out of everything she loved. And the most infuriating part was that she couldn't even call it cruel, because every promise he had attached to it was real. The clinic would grow. The debt would clear. People would be helped. Though he had made it almost impossible to be angry at him. Almost. "I need 24 hours, she said. The counsel nodded, which told her Monsieur had anticipated this answer too. She walked out of the boardroom and straight to the stairwell where no one could see her, press her back against the wall, and close her eyes. She stayed there longer than 30 seconds this time. She stayed there until her breathing evened and the fury in her chest settled into something she could work with. Then she straightened. Then she moved. She pulled out her phone, called the one person she trusted without condition. Her sister Shelby picked up on the second ring, and Lisa could hear the smile in her voice before she spoke, that easy warmth Shelby carried like a birthright. "Lisa, what's wrong?" Lisa opened her mouth and stopped, because behind Shelby's voice, faint but unmistakable, she heard something that turned her blood cold, the sound of a door closing, soft, deliberate. Witty in the silence, she heard it again. In the silence, she heard it again. Breathing that didn't belong to her sister's empty apartment. Someone was already there. She didn't panic. She calculated. She hung up and called back 3 times and got no answer and spent 11 minutes making the only kind of list that had ever saved her life. What she knew. Someone was in Shelby's apartment. Shelby had used the controlled tone of a woman being listened to. What she didn't know yet was how deep KP Yoon's allegiance actually ran and which direction it would fall when the moment came. She was in a cab to Henderson before the list was finished. Shelby lived in a clean mid-rise 20 minutes from the Strip, far enough from Lisa's world that it had always felt like a boundary. Safe, separate. Had learned in ER bays, not for what was had learned in ER bays, not for what was obvious, but for what was trying not to be heard. Nothing, which was worse than something. She knocked. Shelby opened the door, and Lisa had exactly 1 second to read her sister's face before she saw the man standing in the kitchen behind her. Tall, Korean, mid-30s, the kind of build that came from discipline rather than vanity. He held a coffee mug like he belonged there and looked at Lisa with an expression she hadn't expected. Not threat, not coldness, guilt. "You must be Lisa," he said. "And you are," she said flatly. "In my sister's apartment." "His name is KP Yoon," Shelby said, and something in her voice made Lisa go very still. Not fear. Something more complicated. The voice of a woman defending a choice she hadn't fully explained to herself yet. "He works for Monsieur. We've been talking for a while." "How long?" Lisa said carefully. "Is a while." The silence told her everything. 3 months, maybe more. Long enough that Shelby had a relationship with a man connected to Monsieur before Lisa had ever set foot in the Onyx, which meant nothing about last night was random. The root system had been growing underground for months before the flower appeared. "KP Yoon," Lisa said, turning to face him directly. "Han Seo made a phone call last night. She said the second plan uses the sister. Tell me what that means." He set the mug down. The guilt she had clocked on his face sharpened into something more complicated. Not confession, not quite. More like a man choosing which truth to offer first and understanding that the wrong choice would cost him everything. It means Han Seo knows about Shelby, he said. She will use her to create leverage on Misu. She knows he will not allow either of you to be harmed now. Why not? He looked at her steadily, and in his eyes she saw layers she hadn't anticipated. This was not a simple man, because of who your mother is to his family's history. Misu doesn't have the full picture yet, but Han Seo does, and she has been holding it like a weapon for a very long time. Lisa's phone vibrated, a message from a number she didn't have saved. Come back to the Onyx, they're already moving. Then she looked at her sister. Shelby looked back with those steady brown eyes, and for a moment the apartment and the danger and the entire weight of the last 18 hours compressed into that look between them. You knew, Lisa said softly, about KP Yoon, about how close this was getting to me. I didn't know it would cross into your life, Shelby said. I swear that to you, Lisa. It crossed the moment it crossed yours. She took her sister's hand, squeezed once, hard, the way their mother used to when words weren't enough. Then she looked at KP Yoon and held his gaze long enough to make sure he understood she was not asking. You will keep her safe, she said. And when this is over, you will tell me everything you know about what Misu's brother found before he died. Everything. Something moved through KP Yoon's expression. Not relief, not quite. More like a man who had been carrying a weight alone for a very long time and had just been told he no longer had to. She filed that away, because she didn't trust it yet. Guilt that resolved too easily was just another kind of performance. She had learned that from Gerald. She walked out of her sister's apartment and typed a single word back to the unsaved number. Coming. She didn't know that KP Yoon, standing in the kitchen watching her go, had already sent a second message, not to miss you, to someone else. She didn't know that the question of whether to trust him had not yet been answered, only postponed. She didn't know that the betrayal she was least prepared for was not behind her. It was waiting. Misu was standing at the window when she arrived, not pacing. He was not a man who paced. He stood with the stillness he seemed to carry everywhere, one hand in his pocket, the Las Vegas skyline laid out behind him like a city that belonged to him personally. He turned when she entered, and his eyes moved over her the way they always did. One pass, quick, complete, looking for damage. You went to your sister, he said. She's with KP Yoon, Lisa said. And before you tell me that's safe, I want you to explain to me exactly how much you trust him. Because I watched his face when I asked him a direct question, and what I saw was not a man with a clean conscience. Misu was quiet for a moment, then he sat. Not at the desk, not at the table. On the edge of the low couch, elbows on his knees, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked like a man carrying something he hadn't chosen to carry. KP Yoon has been in my organization for 11 years, he said. He was my brother's closest contact in the months before Junho died. I've asked myself every day since then whether that is a reason to trust him or a reason not to. That is not an answer, Lisa said. No, Misu agreed. It isn't. She stood across from him and let the silence hold the weight of that. Because she understood then that Misu didn't have certainty. He had the same fraying threads she did, and he was pulling them the same way she was, carefully, trying not to let the whole thing unravel before the shape became clear. Tell me about Junho, she said. Tell me everything. Not what you told me last night. Everything. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, like a door opened from the inside. He told her. All of it this time. The 2 years Junho had spent following the evidence, the financial trail through hospital systems across 3 states, the same network Rains had described, all of it feeding back to one man sitting protected inside the organization for 30 years. He told her about the night Junho called him from Las Vegas, 3 days before he died, and said he had found the witness. He told her that he had flown in too late, that he had stood in a hospital corridor and identified his brother's body and understood in that moment that the enemy was not outside his walls. It had never been outside his walls. And then he stopped talking, and the room was very quiet, and Lisa looked at him across the space between them and saw something she had not expected to see in a man like Misu. Exhaustion, the real kind. The kind that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying something too heavy for too long, without being able to put it down. She crossed the room. She sat beside him on the edge of the couch, and she reached for his right hand, the one with the tremor, the one he managed alone, and she held it in both of hers the way she had learned to hold things that were fragile without making them feel fragile. He went very still. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at his hand, on feeling the tremor against her palms, assessing it the way she assessed everything, professionally at first, and then with something warmer underneath that she didn't have a clinical name for. "How long?" she said quietly. 4 years, he said. His voice was different, lower, like something had been removed from it. Managed how? "Alone," he said. She looked up at him then. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the controlled danger, not the precise calculation. Something stripped of all of that. A man seen in a way he hadn't allowed before, and not entirely sure what to do with the exposure. She didn't say anything. She just held his hand and let the tremor move against her palms and let him feel that she was not pulling away from it. That was all. That was everything. They sat there in the low light of the suite while Las Vegas burned outside the window, and the silence between them held something new. Something that had not been there the night before, something that did not have a name yet but was real enough to change the shape of the room. Lisa's phone lit up. A photo message from Shelby's number. She opened it. Shelby. Sitting in the back of a car, chin up, eyes burning with that particular fury that meant she was afraid but refusing to show it. The message beneath the image read, "Tell Monsieur to hand over the locket, then she comes home." Lisa looked up. "They have her." "I know," Monsieur said quietly. KP Yoon sent that from Shelby's phone. Lisa stood very still. She ran the calculation. KP Yoon had been in the apartment, had been alone with Shelby, had looked her in the eyes with what she had read as guilt, and she had filed it as unresolved, and she had been right to file it that way, because it had not been resolution she was seeing. It had been a man standing at a fork deciding which road to take, and not yet having taken it. "Give them the locket," she said. "The locket has a drive inside it," Miss Yu said. "Junho's evidence, 30 years of documentation, every name, every transaction, every order. If they get it, this ends before it begins." "My sister," Lisa said, and her voice was quiet, but it cut through everything else in the room. "You have your evidence, and I have one sister. Give them what they want." He held her gaze, long enough that the sounds of the city pressed through the glass between them. Then he reached into his jacket. "Set the locket on the table." "I already copied the drive," he said. "Last night while you were sleeping." Lisa stared at him. "I was going to tell you." "When?" He almost smiled. Now seemed like the right time. For one impossible second, standing in a Las Vegas high-rise with her sister in danger and 30 years of buried truth on the table between them, Lisa pressed her fingers to her mouth to stop something that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob, but lived in the precise territory between the two. "We give them the locket," Miss Yu said. "They release Shelby, and then we use what's already copied to end this, all of it, including whoever has been running this from inside for 3 decades. She picked up the locket, felt the weight of it, small, gold, 30 years of someone else's survival sealed inside. "Okay," she said, "just that." But the way he looked at her when she said it told her it meant more than the word contained. What neither of them said was that KP Yoon had already made a calculation of his own, and neither of them knew yet which way it had landed. They got Shelby back in 40 minutes, a parking garage 3 blocks from the Onyx, Misu's people on every level. Lisa at the exchange point with the locket open in her palm because she had insisted, and Miss Yu, after a long moment of looking at her like a man recalibrating everything he understood about what nerve actually looked like, had let her stand there. KP Yoon brought Shelby out of a black car. Shelby walked toward her sister with her chin up and her eyes burning, not with tears, but with the specific fury of a woman who has been handled and is already building the invoice. "I'm fine," Shelby said quietly. And then, "I'm fine," Shelby said quietly. And then she said, "KP Yoon didn't hurt me. He handed you to them," Lisa said. Shelby held her gaze. "He handed me to them, and then he called Miss Yu. He's been feeding Han Seo's people false coordinates for 3 weeks. Not one of Miss Yu's safe houses was hit because KP Yoon made sure they were looking in the wrong direction every single time. Lisa turned and looked at him across the garage. He stood with his eyes on Shelby, and on his face was the expression of a man who had made a choice in a dark room with no guarantee it would be the right one, and was only now beginning to find out. She looked at him for a long time, not forgiving, not yet, but reassessing. Because a man who had spent 3 weeks feeding false information to people who would kill him for it if they found out was not a man performing loyalty. He was a man paying for it. The Locket exchanged hands. Han Seo's contact confirmed it and relayed a message, and then like smoke, they were gone, carrying a drive that held nothing and leaving behind a copy of everything. Han Seo believed she had won. She was in a private car when she opened the drive. Her man had it connected to a secured device within minutes, and she sat with the patience of someone who had waited years for this moment and could afford to let it arrive without rushing. The screen loaded. Files populated. She opened the first one. Empty. She opened the second. Empty. Her expression did not change. That was the most dangerous thing about Han Seo. She did not react when she should have. She simply sat in the moving car and looked at the empty files and calculated. Her fingers did not tremble. Her breathing did not change. Only her eyes shifted very slightly to something colder than they had been a moment before. "He copied it," she said. Her driver said nothing. She looked out the window at the Las Vegas skyline passing in the dark, and she understood that the board had not reset the way she had planned. It had reset against her. And the woman in the burgundy dress who had kissed Misu in a hotel lobby and accidentally intercepted her signal, the woman she had dismissed as an instrument, a key, an accidental variable, had just become something else entirely. She picked up her phone, dialed. "Tell him we need to move to contingency," she said when the line connected, "and tell him the nurse is no longer peripheral. She's the problem." A pause. "Then understood," the voice said. Han Seo ended the call, looked out at the city one last moment, then said to her driver, quietly and without emotion, "Take me to the airport." She did not run. Women like Han Seo did not run. They repositioned, and she would be back, better informed, with a longer horizon and a sharper instrument than the one she had just lost. But tonight, the city belonged to someone else, the man who had ordered a hit on a journalist in Seoul in 1994, who had spent 30 years inside Miss Yu's organization, protecting his own position and waiting for the last witness to surface, was arrested on a Tuesday morning in his own home. Quietly, without drama. The way power actually ends when someone has been more patient than you and more thorough than you expected. Gerald was handled differently. Lisa did that herself. She used the wiretap the FBI had planted in her bag without her knowledge, the one that had made her an accidental informant, and she built a case the way she built everything, carefully, completely, without leaving anything behind that could come back. She made sure that Rains, the man whose whispered name had cracked the whole architecture open that night at the gala, gave his full statement on record. Every name, every transaction, the complete network. Gerald lost his license, his assets, his story. He went to a federal facility in Nevada, and if the facility happened to fall within the jurisdiction of people who knew Misu's name, nobody said so. Lisa went back to work. 3 weeks after the garage, scrubs, morning shift. By every measure that the world outside, could see, her life had returned to normal. She told herself that was enough. She told herself that for 11 days. On the 12th day, she stood at the nurse's station at the end of her shift and stared at a discharge form she had already completed, and she understood that what she was feeling was not grief, and not longing, and not weakness. It was the particular dissatisfaction of a person who has tasted something true and then returned to a version of their life that is good but no longer complete. She didn't move on that feeling. Not that day. She went home. She made tea. She sat by the window and watched the city do what cities do at night, and she had a conversation with herself that was long and honest and uncomfortable. She thought about what it meant to choose a man like Misu. Not the fantasy version, but the actual version. The man with the tremor in his right hand that he had managed alone for 4 years. The man who had built a cage out of her values to keep her close and then unlocked every door without being asked. The man who had trusted her with the evidence that dismantled his own organization when he could have used it to protect himself instead. She thought about sitting beside him on the edge of that couch and holding his hand and watching something in him go quiet for the first time. A quietness that had nothing to do with control and everything to do with being held by someone who understood what they were holding. She sat with all of it for 3 more days, and then she put on the burgundy dress. She pressed her natural curls into place and smoothed her edges with the precision of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and had decided to do it anyway. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment, not checking, deciding. She found him at the high-limit lounge of the Onyx. Of course she did. He was at a poker table, jacket pristine, cards in hand, and every other player at that table was working very hard to look like they weren't watching him. Lisa walked through the room. She didn't hurry. Her heels found the floor deliberately. Her brown skin caught the amber light of the lounge and held it, and the room noticed her the way rooms notice women who have taken their time with a decision and arrived certain. She stopped beside his chair. He looked up, and in his dark eyes she saw everything he had spent 3 weeks not saying. The restraint of it, the discipline of a man who would not ask for what he wanted and would not pretend he didn't want it. Underneath it, something that had no business existing in a man like him, something that looked terrifyingly, exactly like hope. She leaned down, pressed her lips to his, once warm, real. No desperation this time, no calculation except the truest one. She had weighed her quiet life against this, and her quiet life had come up short. She straightened, looked at him. "I'm renewing the contract," she said, "indefinitely." The table went completely still. Monsieur set his cards down. He stood the way he did everything, like time belonged to him, and he looked at her with an expression that had nothing calculated in it. Just a man standing in the wreckage of everything he had built, and finding that the one thing still standing was the woman in front of him. He offered her his hand, his right hand. The one she had held in the low light of a suite while Las Vegas burned outside and he had let himself be known. She took it, and this time she felt the slight tremor against her palm, and she held it the same way she had before, firmly, without flinching, without looking away. He felt that. She knew he felt it, because something in his face changed in a way she didn't have a word for yet, but understood completely. Across the room, Shelby Washington sat beside KP Yoon with a glass of something sparkling and the smile of a woman who had known exactly how this would end and had been patient enough to let her sister arrive there herself. Outside, Las Vegas kept burning, relentless, indifferent, golden. Inside, a nurse and the man who had built a cage out of everything she loved and then unlocked every door walked out into it together. Not into safety. They both knew better than that. Into something rarer, something chosen. And in a quiet house in Atlanta with old photographs in green frames, a woman named Park Soo-yeon sat by her window and felt for the first time in 30 years that the thing chasing her had finally stopped. She didn't know yet what her daughters had done, or what they had survived, or what they had built from the wreckage. But she picked up her phone, and she dialed a number she had never deleted. It rang twice. Then a voice she hadn't heard since Seoul answered. She closed her eyes, and the story that had started 30 years ago in a city on the other side of the world finally quietly began to breathe again. If you stayed until the very last word, then you already know this story is not finished. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from, because I read every single one. If you want to know what happened in Seoul in 1994, what Lisa's mother saw that made her worth silencing, and what Monsieur does when he finally hears it directly from her, comment renewed below and let me know you are ready for part 2. Like this and share it with someone who loves a story that earns every single moment. Subscribe so you are right here when the next chapter begins. This was the Vegas Gamble, and the real game has not even started yet.